thank you all so much for being here. We just thought we'd start off, Daemond and I, over the course of the last year of working on this piece, have encountered lots and lots of questions. This weekend has been our first opportunity to meet Geronimo, and we thought we might ask a few questions of you, and then hopefully start a conversation that we can all participate in and open things up as we go along.
So I think it's fair also if you have questions of us, just to put that out there, if you do, you're more than welcome to ask. Okay. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah.
What was the like sort of inception of this project, or was there like an inciting event or idea, or how did this germ of an idea become this novel?
Well, when I was at a Civil War reenactment. Even as I said that, I realized that's a bad opening, right? There's no place to go but down. So I feel like I owe you something, so this is what I'll share with you as part of the atmosphere in which the story kind of came to mind. I was living in the South, and I'd grown up between Maryland and New Orleans. Is this being recorded? Great, great. That way I don't have to worry about doing a total like play-by-play recap for my mom and part. So I was living in the South, and I had spent a lot of time in Maryland, and I was kind of taken aback by, you know, the bumper stickers you would see, and a lot of small little tchotchkes you would find in roadside highways, like salt and pepper, climb on cucumber, and mammy shakers and things like this. And so I started collecting them. And this was maybe my way of sort of taking some control over the environment. So I would collect these, and I actually started collecting the lawn jockeys. Right, and so, and then I even have a KKK belt buckle. Wow. And I bought one at the gun show, and you should have seen their face. I went up to this table, and there was a glass case, and it had a lot of, you know, silver things, and then it had this KKK belt buckle that kind of stood out. And because it's red, and you know, it's aesthetically eye-catching. And so I asked the lady behind the counter, I said, how much is this belt buckle? And she said, which one? And I said, this one. And she said, which one? And I said, this one. She said, which one? And I said, no, this one. And she said, Frank, this gentleman would like to talk to you about. And then she just kind of walked away. It was only $10 though, you know, so I bought it.
Wow.
But you know, basically, while I was doing that, just sort of thinking about this feeling of being a stranger in your own land. But then I also had this idea, as I mentioned earlier, because sometimes I would drive by Civil War reenactments, and just having, you know, the mind that I do, I would think, well, what if we increased the cast of characters? You know, what if you had uninvited people run through this battlefield to talk about what the Civil War may have meant for them at the time? But the idea just sat in the back of my head and in a little notebook for probably 10 years, because I was working on the other novel, and I only work on one novel at a time. So.
Wow.
That reminds me of the question that we were talking about in terms of like how far the characters take it.
Yeah. So I was curious. One, the book being satire, and you know, there's shock value within the book. Was there anything in the writing process that you wrote and then realized or came to the conclusion, okay, that went too far, and then had to pull back?
No.
Yes.
No, those are the most encouraging words I got in grad school from the poet Dean Young. He said, "I like how you keep going." It's like other people people would avoid the collision, but like you keep going. You said always do that, just like keep going. And so I don't actually think people have a lot of time to read. I'm not going to say that we're competing with other mediums, but people don't have a lot of time to read. So I want someone, if they're going to read one of my books, to feel like it's not a story that they've read before. Otherwise, why? There are other things for you to do with your life. It's valuable, you know. And I also want them to feel like it was worth their time at the end, that it was a bit of an experience. And so those things are often like in the forefront of my mind. Like, well, is this going to be worth what I'm requiring of another human being that I don't know?
Wow.
And that means you have to go all the way, because other human beings in their minds are going all the way. Right, like, so people know when you're doing that polite dance, right, of not actually engaging the conversation. And, you know, if I'm in my private space writing and the reader's in his or her, their private space reading, then I think that I can take that liberty and go all the way with the conversation, because that's what I think other humans respond to. I think that's what we respond to in art, that kind of authentic exposure and engagement.
Geronimo, can you speak to the choice that you made around not having quotation marks in the book?
Yes. So I made a series of like kind of narrative and grammatical choices that I knew were going to distance some readers. But I have this abiding interest as a writer, not in what we'll discuss openly in safe spaces, and not even what we're thinking, but won't admit to. I'm most interested in what we don't know we're thinking, right? Because that's what's really driving the car. And so one of the things I was trying to get at in the novel is, and also in the first one, but in this novel, is the gap between what you'll say, what you're really thinking, and then what you don't even know you're thinking. And so because I wanted to have this, fluid access to the character's consciousness, it meant that I couldn't use the quotation marks, because I wanted this to be a little bit slippery, right? At times for even Ron or Darren, to get lost even in his own, you know, thought process, and to kind of replicate, you know, that prickly path we follow when we start to think through an idea that just cannot have a logical conclusion that's very attractive. You know, and so removing the quotations, I felt, was this trade-off where a lot of people would reject the book because it's now lacking a very important standard like marker. This is a very important container. But at the same time, what I was hoping for, and this was the gamble was that the book would appeal to fewer readers, but those readers to whom it appealed would have a richer experience. So it's kind of requiring you to lean in more, because if you could figure out how it worked, like if you could get the book and then it would be kind of a communing at the level of heart, like below, just sort of below like the rational self. And so that was the goal.
Wow.
It was achieved.
Well, thank you.
Then, I don't know why I just made it, this is not one of the pre-questions, but in your acknowledgments at the book, at the end, you thank your agent, Eleanor, I'll be the judge of what's hard to sell, Jackson. I love that, and I think that what you were just saying, maybe what speaks volumes about your intention and
Well, I was going to self-publish Braggsville.
Were you really?
I was. Eleanor and I had just started working together, and we're on the phone, and she asked me to give her a rundown of all my projects, and like any writer, I have a whole bunch of manuscripts under the bed. And so I listed all of the projects, and then I said, okay, and then I have this weird novel. It's hard to describe. You know, it has college admissions essays in it. It kind of you know, moves in different directions. It has a stage lynching. You know, it's it's not really a sellable project. I just kind of wrote it for myself. And she said, I will be the judge of what's hard to sell.
That's amazing.
So just if you're trying to get an agent, claim to have an unsellable project.
No one could sell this, I don't know.
I've heard you talk about in other conversations, and I wonder if you share with us here. When you first started writing the book, you were writing the main character as a black character, is that right? And at what point, and what was the decision-making process like to change him to a white character?
So I was actually at a hotel in Ireland in Dunleary. When, you know, as I said earlier, I'd written a bit of the novel on my iPhone as I was traveling when like voices would come to me. And I reached a point where I didn't feel that the story's growing organically, right? So I want everything to make sense on some level. And you know, just because as a side note, this is why we need literature and art to make sense of a world that's kind of senseless, right? So I was like, okay, thinking what's happening here, and it felt that what I was not able to push through was this idea that you have a African-American male from a small southern town who voluntarily goes back to disrupt the Civil War reenactment because it just never occurred to him that might not be a good idea. And one of the things I try to avoid doing as a writer is sending characters on journeys to discover things they already know, right? That's more of what we do with, you know, different genres, but not what I'm trying to do. So I realized that the character had to be someone who wasn't fully aware, who'd somehow been able to live and exist and coexist peacefully, right, with everything else that was going around him in the town. And as soon as I made that switch, the story just opened up, you know. And then also it allowed me to do something unlike what I'd done in the last novel, and so it didn't become a story, because the first novel is about, you know, at heart this kid who's African American, but he's raised by a white family, so he sort of learns what it means to be black when he leaves home. And so there's this process of being racialized, and I didn't want to have elements of that same story at play. So changing the race of the main character freed me from that, though in the end, he does find out that race means things, you know, that he didn't think it meant, but he's not being racialized in the same way.
Yeah.
So just sort of like kind of loosen things up a little bit. Yeah.
One thing that I loved about the book, and I feel like I think we do some justice to it within the play, is the amount of code switching that's going on, the amount of different languages, essentially, while all fitting under the heading of English. There's numerous dialects that are being spoken. And also the fact that the characters create their own terminology, which brings me to zombie dick slap. I have my own theories on it, but I'm very curious as to if you would speak to it.
I want to hear someone else's theory. Zombie dick slap.
Do you want to jump on that? I have my theories on it.
Yeah, you know, I think you and I have different ones, don't we?
I think so.
Yeah.
So for myself, zombie in the sense of something coming to life that's been long dead, or at least has been dead, and bringing it back to life. And specifically in regards to racism, looking at the South, and these things that, like, when they're standing in Lou's bait and cash and carry shop. That's the moment when Lewis kind of has this moment, and it's these ideas that are supposedly from the past and yet are still present. So these things that we want to die but never seem to really die. And then thinking to Lewis and Darren's obsession with porn and sex. There's not much that's going to be more offensive than a slap across the face with a dick. So, like, that's honestly to me what a lot of this stuff feels like. This being slapped across the face with these issues that keep coming up and we can't seem to get past. That's my take.
That's
really good. But I have a feeling I'm wrong.
So in the book, it's not in the play, but like when they're looking at the photographs of that Lewis has posted, there's one of the statue of Bragg, and that like, am I correct in remembering that like there's like a bit of like that the statue also like it's somewhat like visible his penis, or that like it's somewhat like sculpted under the like pants and the bronze and everything like that, and that like Darren like there's notices that, and I thought it was like Lewis, because Lewis has a way of looking at the world and just turning everything on, and I wondered if it was like in Lewis's mind that it was Bragg like being this like undead monster that haunts the town, and that like him seeing like this sculpture that actually had like some like genitalia somewhat vaguely carved into it, that it was a zombie dick slap from Bragg in this town. But I feel like that's way further off.
Your turn.
He's about to walk out.
So, regarding the mystery of the necrotic penis, the answer is that you're both right.
Really?
Well, the general rule, Marilyn Robinson said this, well, I'm actually going to quote her twice because it depends on who she's talking to at the time. She says, no one should do anything in a novel for less than 3 reasons, or no one should do anything in a novel for less than 7 reasons. So I guess it depends on how optimistic she feels about your abilities. But that's what's going on there, that it's speaking to several things simultaneously. And the reason that's important is so that, because you can't tether it to just one thing, because like someone might miss the statue or miss the connection between, say, the history being undead, so to speak, and being unearthed, so to speak, this kind of zombie history, which then comes up at the end when the speech, when Charlie gives this speech, right, about zombie movies, right, and how and when they re-entered public consciousness. So it's for all of those, it's for both of those reasons, plus a couple more. And it was the one thing I was most disappointed no one latched onto when the book first came out. It was like the one thing I figured people would kind of hold on to, and no one really picked up on that.
Yeah, numerous conversations. What about this? What about, I'm not sure. We went around and around about it for a number of times.
Yeah, and I remember in writing in the adaptation, in terms of like, we knew that it was important and that it needed to be in there, and we learned how tied into it really was because of like the scenes that we needed. We were like, well, oh man, there's a lot of scenes that we need to include here in order for this to even have like connective tissue to the rest of the play.
Right. But then they're also like they're young dudes, so there's just a lot of dick slapping.
Yeah.
Right? They're talk about dick slapping. They want to, slap each other in the dick with their psychology textbooks whenever they offer cheap pop psychology interpretations of events, and and so some of that's kind of spinning off of Lewis's eternal irreverence. Right? He's just never ever gonna say that anything is too serious to be deflated with humor.
Right. That much is true. Should we?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
unless you want to ask us, but
I feel like it's good.
Did we have to get, or did you have to get permission to put Charlene in
there?
we actually discussed that a little bit, but it felt necessary and poignant, and I felt honestly because we had talked about this via text, if Charlene had been killed by the time that the book had come out and Geronimo had known about it, it probably would have been in the book as well.
So I saw this hand here first with the glasses, and
Yes.
there's a hand over here too.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, her hand was up way long ago.
This is like Seattle. White ladies get to vote. Thank you. When you were talking about the Charlene thing and then you brought in Solano Castile, there are a legion of cases about people being in the public and using their names. And you would not, I don't believe anybody would have a case. You trail up, what did you say? I think they were perfectly within their rights to use Charlene's name, and certainly to use Rolando Castillo or any of the other names.
And to me, it didn't feel in poor taste. It didn't feel like we were taking advantage. It felt like we were honoring these names that
For
need
me,
to be
it
heard.
kind of made the whole thing an honorific to them. And you can't do a lot better than that.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks.
Yes.
And
All right. Well, that is, of course, if you agree that Philando Castile and Charlena Lyles had anything to do with race. Not everyone agrees with that. But my question to you is, now, of course, I can't imagine that you would agree with this next statement, but the characters in the book, and you had to do something, you had to do a plot device, responding to an innocuous Civil War reenactment with a really wicked stunt like a mock lynching, to me does not add up. So Civil War reenactments to me are completely innocuous and they'll go on forever, no harm done anywhere. And a mock lynching, on the other hand, is a big problem because it pretends to harm another human being. Like in the sense of a lynching, where a mob goes after one particular person, or two or three. Not exactly the same as a Civil War reenactment, or Revolutionary War reenactment, or any other kind of reenactment. So I'm happy to hear what. See, I'm among the people in Seattle who like to full forward, get the answer. Come to an agreement, either get the answer or agree to disagree. So so there you go. I'd like to hear from you.
But the Civil War is,
If we,
Well, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, the little Civil War reenactments are not innocuous. Civil War is loaded.
And
With class and with race.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And people get killed in wars. People get killed in lynchings. That's a very specious distinction.
And that lynchings are not something that are the food of the Civil War. Oh yes, tragically, horrifyingly, yes, they are. So Civil War reenactments are not innocuous. I'm from Kentucky, and I think I can say that from experience.
And
So there's a lot going on in your question, and so let's take this idea that Castile, for example, is not about race, and that the Civil War reenactment is also not about race. Okay. This is how some people are viewing the world. And so that's their reality, because perception is reality. So I'm not sure if you're asking me to defend other people's subjective perceptions of the world, or if you yourself are telling me that those incidents are not about race.
I got an answer for you.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, yeah, the Civil War, of course, a very heavy racial component. That's beyond doubt. So the Civil War reenactment, of course, race is involved in just about anything Civil War related. So I was just referring to the two, cases that people had talked about. The question of a lynching and a Civil War reenactment, to me, are very different things.
How are they different?
Hugely different.
I don't care if you think it's different or not.
Happy to a single sentence response, and that's it.
So here's
Don't tell him to have a single sentence.
No, I was offering that for me.
Here's something that you can consider or not. This is what I was thinking when I was writing and thinking about these characters. The fact is that as adults we have become desensitized, and just like I live in Stanford, the San Francisco Bay Area, homelessness, unconscionable amount. We become desensitized, and so we live with a lot of societal or social ills that we could do something about, but often we don't, we're busy. The thing about the youth, and this is why so many movements start with the youth, is that they haven't kind of bought into that bullshit. And people who are young are often not yet at this point where they're willing to accept injustice as it is. And so they're a little less tolerant of things that they view as being inequitable, and their perception of inequity is much more nuanced generation by generation. So in your perception, it may be that the Civil War, regardless of the loss of life or the peculiar institution that it was protecting, is completely unrelated to or somehow disproportionate in relation to the act of lynching in the individual instance. But that's just your perception. And other people who are looking at the world with more nuance aren't really seeing it that way. And I realize that I just said that what you said lacks nuance. I'm not trying to slip that around the side. That's just how it sounds to me. That's just how it kind of sounds to me. And so in terms of the book, that's what's going on with the book. You have these people who just want to see the world better. They just want to see the world better. But in terms of the reality of living day to day, the thing is, even if something is not about race or about sex or about gender, if it appears to be, then that's the reality for a lot of people. And I think that one of the things we need to be especially careful about in this that other people are living in.
I just would like to have you share with us the authors seeing a production of your ideas and how you felt when you saw it, and did you go, oh my God, or...
I never heard him say, oh my God. He was sitting one seat away from me. He might have said it under his breath, though.
We can leave the room if you'd like.
I was thirsty during the barbecue scene, so I did say, rosé. But it was interesting because I've read the book aloud to myself. It's been read to me by many of the people, my partner and others. I've had it read to me by my computer to just get the sonics down. But the interesting thing about the play is that even though I know the story, I've never actually seen it outside of me. I've always seen it in my head. And so for me, it was a surprisingly emotional experience because I was actually watching these humans, like, speak these lines, but also like emote and so forth and so on. And I found myself often moved because it was taking me back to the space where I was when I wrote the book, which was it was an emotional blender, like, as you might imagine, because there's this there's loss of life, there's this really complicated history, there's all of this inappropriate humor. So it was a very kind of like electrical emotional space. And to the credit of the play and of the adaptation, it took me back to a space that I had no intention of ever entering again as long as I live, because I already wrote that book. So it was very, very enjoyable, and I found myself, like good and bad, it was just really enjoyable. I found myself thinking of all the people who aren't here that I wish could actually have seen it. Everyone who was involved in the book, from like the family members and loved ones who have supported me to the whole publishing crew in New York. I think they would just flip over it.
This is being recorded, right? I want to take this moment, do a little happy dance. Let it go.
Do you foresee this going to another stage? Take it to New York.
I mean, that's a conversation we would love to have, and that's a conversation that we obviously need to have with Geronimo and other folks about that possibility. And I mean, it certainly feels timely and impactful. So TBD.
There was another hand right
I think this idea of the zombie world is very compelling, and I think it's so clear we're living in it, and you revealed it so beautifully. The solution, like the breakthrough, I think you just said is youth. I wondered if I felt discouraged at the end, and wonder if you have some sense of how this might move forward.
I don't feel particularly optimistic. Things are getting better. Slowly. I don't know that we'll see any sudden acceleration in the rate of change. One of the things that I find worrisome is AI. Not because it's going to take over, but because we've passed on a lot of our, we'll say, like ignoble predilections. So AI prefers light skin to dark skin, and the sentencing risk assessment algorithms they use with prisoners or criminals pretty much always, or most of the time, flag criminals or alleged criminals with dark skin as being higher flight risks than ones with white skin. And it's not based on statistical data, as far as I know. It's based on, or a historical statistical data, sort of based on some data set that we're not able to really open up and look inside of. And so what's kind of happening then is, as we offload more of our decisions about our day-to-day lives to our phones, right, which tell us the best way to get home, how you can save 4 minutes, and eventually are going to tell you how to get home without looking at anything you don't like. I mean, that's where it's going, right? This is where we're going, right? And so we're moving into a world that's increasingly curated for us. People are online and they look at the browser and they think it's a window, but it's only a mirror. And so this is why I'm not terribly optimistic.
Well, one of the things that I loved about the book is also the fact that none of this is easy. Looking in the mirror is not easy, and especially in a world where a lot of us like to think, well, I'm not racist, well, I'm not sexist, I'm not homophobic, I can't be those things. Because we want to be the hero, we want to be the good person, we want to be, the savior. And we're all guilty. We all are part of this system. We are all cogs in this system, this machine. And if we don't address these things, if we don't look at ourselves honestly and say, instead of the knee-jerk reaction of, no, I can't be, no, I'm not, well, what if I am? What part of me is? Where did that come from? How am I feeding that? What can I do to change it? If we don't do those things, then we go back to that subconscious stuff that just is driving the car, as Geronimo mentioned. It's that thing that allows us to keep letting things like homelessness run rampant. But if I don't have to look at it, it's not really my problem. But they're all our problems. We are all part of these issues. We are all guilty in different ways and to different levels. But if we're not willing to look at the ugly stuff, we can't get through to the beautiful stuff. But we have to be willing to accept the ugly and look at it within ourselves to be able to make change.
Very good.
I grew up in South Carolina, and we're talking about Columbia, I know very well, and it sort of was part of my world as I grew up. That's what was normal. And I recall when I moved to New York very early on, a friend of mine who was new to the country, she was from Germany, and her family had made questionable choices. And during the war, and when we talked about our backgrounds and where I grew up, she was astounded. It just didn't make sense to her. Like the narrative, because I went to schools named after Confederate generals, like there were all these memorials, and that's just not like, no one mentions Nazis. There's no memorials to Nazis. You study them, there's none of that. And she just sort of like, when she heard about it, she says, it seems as if the narrative is that you guys were the ones who waged war in America, and you're constantly being punished for it. Like, that's what it sounds sort of like, well, yeah, like, maybe my ancestor killed Lincoln. That would make sense with, like, what we, like, well, no, that's not what happened. So it's sort of the idea we are still conditioned to it. That's why we kind of find a situation where you think a Civil War reenactment is benign and protesting it is not, because just there is this concept of maybe we were the ones who did something that we kind of, if you're growing up in the South as a black person, you're sort of getting constantly reinforced, because it's sort of like, well, that has to be an explanation for this, right? Like something, and it was a very telling situation with having someone who had that very different experience. So that was sort of, when I hear the story and hear about how people react to it, that kind of comes to that. Here we don't really, we kind of look at our history in a very kind of bubble narrative.
Yeah, definitely. The mind seeks to resolve dissonance, and so if you were to look at the state of black folks in America or other minority groups, you would just almost be forced to conclude that there's something wrong with the group itself, right? Because how else do you explain the state, if you think of, say, the speech Charlie gives at the end, which is what it leads to? How do you explain this condition in a country that provides everyone equal opportunity, right? And this is what the bell curve is all about. This is why at the beginning of the bell curve, the author writes, imagine you had two groups of people on a race, and one group just got into the race a little bit later, but still couldn't seem to catch up after 2 rounds. Obviously they're just not good runners. Right? This is essentially what it says at the beginning. And so a lot of it depends, I suppose, on how much you're willing to believe the myth of America, and whether you think of it as a promise, right, or as something that's already been delivered. And I try to think of it more as a promise, somewhere we're going. It's definitely nowhere we've been. But I think a lot of people think of it as someplace we've always been, Yeah, but it's not. Yes.
Yeah, I would like to respond to the gentleman who just spoke before you. I'm originally from Germany, and I believe there are, in quotes, memorials too, but those are reminders of what has happened. and that we should never do that again. In other words, you know, the concentration camps are there to be visited. Former victims are invited to schools and speak about their experiences and so on. So it's a memorial in a different way. And I have grown up, I'm a lot of my parents' generation unfortunately did what they did during the Nazi time. I was the second generation after that, and I have to tell you, during my childhood, no one spoke about it. Neither my parents nor my teachers. We were told in school that the First World War happened from 1914 to 18, the Second World War from 1939 to 1945, end of story. It was only the generation thereafter that started to deal with it. And personally, I have lived with collective guilt for all my adult life, and I have never gone past it. I have worked with victims of Nazism. I have handled restitution claims against the German government. I have written my thesis on that time. It has been a huge part of my life. But I am somewhat relieved that Germany is dealing with it and is keeping the memory alive. So those are memorials, but in a very, very different.
Well, they're memorials to the actual
to the victims.
I've been to plantations where there's women in fancy dresses and gowns and whatever. And
There's nothing about the
you ask to see the slave quarters to get burned down because there's no interest in preserving anyone, preserving these homes and whatever. And again, if you're going to first growing up, it's just
That's why I said memorials in quotation marks, because it's a completely different meaning.
Thank you both for those perspectives.
You had a question.
Well, I was going to bring up the bell curve because one of the things that AI has enabled us to do since that book came out is to mine the data a lot more and say, wait a minute, if it's so heavily tilted such that one group is coming out so far behind, we need to look very closely at that. And there's more of that going on now, and there are more and more people who grow up with that who know how to work with it and apply it. So I think I'm a little more optimistic than you about it because I see a generation that's connected in a way that mine can't even get its heads around. And especially after having taught college and law school for 30 years, there are some very good minds and some very good hearts that are coming along, and they have really spectacular tools, and they know how to use them, and that's what makes me optimistic. I might not be around to see it, but I think I see the glimmers on the horizon. I hope you're right.
Yeah, you know,
too.
Stanford did just release a big report on inequity in policing, and it uses a lot of data, right? There's a lot of data. And so this is, I might say, an algorithm being deployed conscientiously, you know? I suppose that the reason I remain skeptical about the rate of progress is because it is so difficult for Black people to integrate, right? In that you can never not be Black if you appear Black. And so there is associated with Blackness a host of, anxieties and malignant attentions. And so I'm not sure how that's going to be decoupled. You know, the thing is, even when you ask a Black child, like we talked about the doll test earlier, even when you ask a Black child which of these dolls is most attractive, the Black doll or the white doll, the Black child chooses the white doll.
Right.
Right? You know, and so this is what I'm thinking about, this kind of irrational nebulous of like associations and histories, and it gets tricky then because let's say you take a story like Roots. I haven't seen the remake, but you know, the original was an event that shocked, you know, a lot of people, really engaged them. But what's tricky about it is that even as you're showing these horrific scenes that engage people, those horrific scenes still reinforce the association between the black body and that type of violence.
That's true, but to wind it back to the kids with the dolls, kids did not come down to shoot thinking that.
Exactly.
And
Right.
so we need to trace it back to how exactly.
You know, and I think that's, and this is what I think is going to be so difficult, because it's not something that's mandated per se. Like, so even if we were to write laws that guaranteed everyone equitability, we still have this kind of, well, even if we call it a superstition, right? This superstition is still out there, you know.
But at least recognizing it is a means to getting past it.
Absolutely.
Frankly, I see a lot of hope in the fact that as a group, we're becoming darker and darker. It's darker, and eventually we're all going to be the same color.
We'll see about that. Considering the topic matter, how did you decide on the makeup of the four Olympians?
I'm sorry, David, could you repeat the question?
How I was asking Geronimo, thinking again about race and these different demographics. How did he decide on the makeup of this cadre of young people? How did he decide on who these characters were going to be, or was that a conscious thing?
You know, you couldn't have an ensemble of much more than 4. Felt for it to work. You know, 3 legs wouldn't really hold up the table. So I knew I needed someone white, someone black. Right? These are kind of the ends of the continuum. Someone who is cis male, right? Someone who's cis female, and then what became tricky, and this was kind of a slip in a way, is that Lewis looks like everything, right? So we end up with an Asian who, because he's brown, replicates within the Asian cultural hierarchy the same skin tone hierarchy that we have in the larger world. So that gets echoed through in ways that are complementary, but also it lets him kind of stand in. You know, visually, you just couldn't fit everyone in without the ship just listing. And so I don't know that I felt I could put another ball in the air and still convincingly and skillfully juggling so much going on. Yeah.
There was a hand up way in the back.
I was just going to ask you about when you did use your quotation marks, and I found that the book was very poetic. So I wondered if you would study poetry or you write poetry. It just had such a beautiful rhythm, even if you couldn't tell if they were speaking out loud or thinking or something.
You know, I think that's a great question.
Your mother will be happy.
I think like a lot of writers, I started writing poetry in high school. It was terrible. It was always about heartbreak and candles flickering on the walls, and it was morose. And when it rhymed, it was bad, and when it didn't rhyme, it was worse. And so I often say that I kind of left poetry to the smart folks who can actually do it. But then what happened in Braggsville was it needed a few different voices. So you needed like Nanny Tag, and you needed this sort of not really a Southern Gothic voice, but a narrative voice that welcomes Southern rhythms, Southernisms, so to speak. And then because there were no quotation marks, then it just meant it was incumbent upon me to do more work to distinguish the different voices, so you start to get a feel for who's talking even when they're not identified. So probably that was, I think, a good thing for the book. I think a good thing in the book for the end, even though it was a little bit more work. But no, officially not a poet. Just just like, just laboring over making everyone sound like themselves. Yeah. So that was a great question.
We're gonna give these guys, we're at our time just about, so I want to give you guys just one more minute if you have questions for each other, or if you want to leave us with something before we go. You've been super incredible. Thank you all for having this really important conversation with us. So just take 2 more minutes from you guys.
I'm looking at these questions. I mean, so many questions. I'm curious what because the locations of this book really seem to take on a life force of their own. These locations, Berkeley, the South, Braggsville, the Holler, become characters in their own right. Was that something that you set out to do, or did that kind of emerge?
Set out to do. But yeah, definitely set out to do. I mean, these two places are so far apart.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is that there are elements of intolerance in both.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was intentional. Yeah. Because the thing is, they're perceived as so different. Right. That if you can nail Berkeley with, or just the Bay Area with, the Michael Jackson roller skating troupe, right? And then catch Braggsville with, the bumper stickers and whatnot. I felt like there was space in between for lots of other ways of being. And these other ways of being would not feel necessarily too extreme or too out of sorts, because they're sandwiched between these two worlds that are so different, so starkly different. Yeah.
That's all the questions. You said I can unpack in a minute.